Thank you all for coming here tonight. My name is Dr. Maha Hilal, and I'm co-director of Justice for Muslims Collective and an organizer with Witness Against Torture. Today, our panel is titled Guantanamo, 18 Years Later, Witnessing and Resisting Our Carceral Society. This event is part of our days of action leading up to the annual rally to close Guantanamo and end torture that will happen this Saturday, January 11th. I want to start by sharing how the conceptualization of this event and topic came about. Last August, a CCR attorney, Pardees Kibrai, who's amazing if you don't know her, was in court arguing for her client to get independent medical examination. Of course, there was pushback from the government and a lack of understanding of how power asymmetries in the prison, specifically around medical issues, continues to manifest itself. But there was a very particular reason why Sharqawi al-Hajj, the client in question, needed an independent medical exam. Prior to the hearing, he had revealed that he had suicidal ideations and had also taken pieces of glass and slit his wrists. Now, I imagine all of you in this room can think about why someone in Guantanamo would want to commit suicide, right? The judge's response was, al-Hajj, the Guantanamo prisoner, wasn't trying hard enough to kill himself. So imagine the cruelty inherent in this specific case, right? And in many cases that surround Guantanamo. But this statement by the judge is indicative of two things. One, an ever-looming paradox that has shaped Guantanamo, where death can only be rendered by the state. And two, that the state, as a matter of necessity in this specific case, has to preserve life in order to sustain the claim of winning the war on terror, despite the costs, monetary and otherwise. The judge's statement, however, is also indicative of a larger narrative around prisoner resistance and the inability to understand it as a means for change, whether or not it includes death. This is also a symptom of how we understand prisoners' agency that brings to the forefront the power struggle over who literally controls their bodies. Prisoner resistance is therefore about confronting and challenging the asymmetrical power that is inherent to confinement, using the one tool they have at their disposal, their bodies. Where death becomes a tactic of resistance, Naomi Paik, in her book titled Rightlessness, Testimony and Redress in U.S. Prison Camps Since World War II, writes that, quote, death-risking tactics the detainees pursue are utterly logical. They have inflicted self-harm to expose their living death, to bring their physical bodies into line with their social death, end quote. Along these lines, and important to understand, however, is that there is a distinction between the physical and metaphysical body. The state, in fact, has no interest in keeping the metaphysical body alive. And the prisoners, knowing this, utilize their physical bodies, their physical deaths, to reclaim autonomy, agency, and ultimately their lives. One resistance tactic that has been used frequently at Guantanamo by prisoners includes hunger strikes, which the state has often referred to as voluntary non-religious fasting. This euphemism is obviously designed to obscure the reasons why prisoners are resisting. Moreover, hunger strikes render the body as a site of war where the right to protest is violently interrupted by force feeding. This interruption, however, is not meant to preserve an inherently valuable life, but instead to disrupt the promise of death as a last resort to all other extinguished means of change. Through these ensuing power struggles, the state simultaneously demonstrates how they assign different meanings to life and death, where life is more torturous than death, and where death becomes instead liberation and subsequently a focal point of state intervention. One of the most well-known cases of prisoner resistance at Guantanamo is of Adnan Latif, who is a Yemeni citizen and who was detained for many years at Guantanamo. He was also cleared for release 3 times. Ultimately, Adnan ended his life because he knew the only way out of Guantanamo was in a coffin. Latif, in fact, described Guantanamo as quote, living in a dying situation. And before he died, Latif had written many letters with statements such as, quote, "It's the injustice and the torture I am enduring, the torture that humiliates, wastes one's dignity, that makes a person call for death every second, scream asking for it with no hesitation and without a second thought. Laying the body in the grave is better than laying it in fire and torture that I am enduring," end quote. In his dissertation titled Bodily Destruction, Bodily Empowerment, A Year of Detainee Resistance at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, Matthew Sandoval described the struggle between Latif and the state, writing that, quote, "Just as the government tried to use every resource at its disposal to control and dominate his life, he used every resource at his disposal to take his life. It was a matter of wit, it was a matter of will. Leaving Guantanamo by any means necessary became all that mattered to Latif." When Latif was eventually repatriated to Yemen, there were no markers indicating that it was his body, just the date of his death and his detainee number. There was, as Sandoval continued, quote, "No name, no information, no description, no letter, nothing resembling a shred of humanity. Just a box, a bag, a number. The United States, even in his death, was unwilling to concede that Adnan Latif wasn't anything more than an object, something to be acted upon, something to be shipped around the world, from one plane to the next, from one truck to the next, from one metal box to the next," end quote. Where Latif's detention and death symbolized his resistance and categorical rejection of his detention, the state sought to erase any evidence of it. And while Latif used the only agency he had to commit suicide, the state, nevertheless, stripped him of what he had claimed in a final act of humiliation. While Guantanamo is unique in many ways, including its physical location in Cuba and the specific sets of rights restrictions that have been imposed on the prisoners, through legal gymnastics that apply different rules to this offshore prison, it is nevertheless a complete and total manifestation of the carceral state that the United States has become notorious for. However, if we understand the US as a carceral state rooted simply in power, domination, and control, the manifestations of what this looks like may be visibly different, but structurally are the same. What is also the same is that prisoners will always challenge control and domination of their bodies, and that as docile as the state trains prisoners to become, is often met with the same degree of resistance from the prisoners. In his writings, Foucault stated that, quote, "The most intense point of a life, the point where its energy is concentrated, is where it comes up against power, struggles with it, attempts to use its forces to avoid its traps," end quote. So today and every day is an opportunity to uplift our incarcerated community members who live this struggle directly every day. Whether it's incarceration of Japanese Americans in World War II, the enslavement of African Americans and their continued detention, or immigrant detention, the state is rooted in white supremacy and other connected systems of oppression. So knowing what we do know about the carceral state in the United States makes it imperative that we understand the relatedness of our struggles in order to disrupt the root of them. We must also prioritize and center resistance from the inside and respond with solidarity that does not shift the focus away from the prisoners. For those of us on the outside, our job is to steadfastly witness injustice. So there is a continued reminder, a continued public memory of what so many marginalized groups in this country have had to and continue to endure. Witnessing, therefore, is an act that requires a commitment to resistance in the long haul, because we know that the carceral state cannot be dismantled overnight, and that its many manifestations make it difficult to control. Today, you will have the opportunity to hear from 3 incredible speakers who will present on the topic of the US's carceral state from multiple perspectives, so that we can understand the complexity of the system and how our work on the outside can contribute to liberation for those on the inside. I want to conclude with 2 quotes from Muslim prisoners, one detained in Norway and the other in the United States. The former, named Alir, as cited in a book by Scott Ulgovic, refused to address in front of prison officers because of his religious beliefs. As a result, the state reprimanded and punished him by recording in his record that he was a drug user. Alir's story sheds light on everyday resistance in prison and the driving force behind it, stating that, quote, and he stated that, quote, "The day I submit is the day my heart stops beating. I'll be dead. Otherwise, I'll always stand my ground until the final second, wherever I am. That's just the way I am," end quote. The latter is a prisoner named Ahmed Farhani. Ahmed Farhani was entrapped by the NYPD and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Farhani attempted suicide in detention and was stopped, and of course the government intervened. And in response, Farhani stated that, quote, "I want everyone to know that the next time I am violated by correction officers or their supervisors, I will take my own life. If taking my own life is the only way to expose the evils that are practiced daily by corrections officers, then I will be glad to do it," end quote. So this is prisoner resistance in the carceral state, and this is what we are here to uplift. So I hope that sort of helps frame the conversation that we'll be having tonight, and I'm extremely excited to have three incredible speakers with us that bring such a wealth of experience. So our first speaker is Aliyah Hussein, also a good friend of mine, and she is the Advocacy Program Manager at the Center for Constitutional Rights, where she advocates on behalf of the center's former and current Guantanamo clients. She has managed campaigns that have supported prisoner-led hunger strikes, art making, and storytelling. Next, we have Robert Salim Holbrook, who is the Director of Community Organizing at the Abolitionist Law Center, a public interest law firm organized for the purpose of abolishing class and race-based mass incarceration in the United States. He's also co-founder of the Human Rights Coalition, an organization with chapters in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh that is composed of family members of prisoners and which advocates on behalf of the civil and human rights of prisoners. Then we have Mike Ishii, is that right? Who's co-chair of Tsuru for Solidarity, a nonviolent direct action project of Japanese American social justice advocates working to end detention sites and support frontline immigrant and refugee communities that are being targeted by racist, inhumane immigration policies. So each of the speakers will offer some preliminary remarks, then we'll have a moderated Q&A, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So let's give our speakers a round of applause, and without further ado,